Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McGonville. A little while ago I did a trip into a place where I didn't have a lot of internet access, where I wasn't really able to go and just walk the streets and take photos like I normally would. So I spent a lot of time in my room thinking about watches and this channel and how I would like and where I thought my watch reviews would go. And when I was doing that, I was just sort of making notes about the kinds of things that people talk about when they talk about watches, but might not necessarily include in their reviews, and so or not put words to what they're talking about in reviews. And I found that people would often come up with various issues that they would talk about but struggle to put a word to, which I've actually I spent some time thinking about. And now I've come up with my own word that I'm going to use in this case. And the word I'm talking about is authenticity. And if you're one of the few people who saw my recent review on the Fortis Flieger GMT, you would have seen me talking about the authenticity of this watch. And I think it's a concept this concept of authenticity is actually something which is common in the watch world, but and maybe I've stolen it from somewhere, but I haven't heard anyone else say this word, and I think it's useful to think about. Okay, so what exactly is authenticity? I've broken it down into three kind of things, three factors, but I'm going to step back a little bit first and say, where do I get the concept of authenticity from? Well, funnily enough, it's another concept that I've stolen from philosophy, and in particular, again, from existentialism, where authenticity is a central theme of living a good life. According to existential philosophy, we should be seeking to live an authentic life. And an authentic life is a life that you have created for yourself, where you are living as you should truly be, as you truly are. Not as you think you should be, not as other people want you to be, not as you think will be best for you in some commercial sense, but in a way that truly reflects who you are and what makes you happy, in a way that truly reflects your values. So authenticity is about, in the first instance, recognizing your freedom to create yourself and then acting on that. But here's the second part of authenticity, which is recognizing that we do not have complete freedom, that there are limits to what we can in fact be. The technical term that philosophers use for this is facticity. In truly being authentic in your freedom, you have to realistically understand what your limitations are and acknowledge those and build those into your conception of who you're going to make yourself. A classic form of facticity is to recognize your history, that it is being inauthentic to cut yourself off from the history that you've had, to say that the person I was yesterday is not who I am today. I will dump all of my relationships, I will ignore all the promises I made yesterday and simply move on as if yesterday did not happen. That would be inauthentic. That would be to not recognize that who you are today and where you may go tomorrow is not necessarily tethered to for all time, but is certainly constrained by who you were yesterday. Likewise, another sort of form of facticity is an authentic life. An authentic promise, for example, can only be authentic insofar as the facts would even allow that to happen. So if I was to make a promise about what I would be, where I would go, what I would provide, but the fact was I simply couldn't do those things, I didn't have access to the resources, I didn't have the ability to make that happen, then I may as well be lying to you. I am being inauthentic. So taking that and thinking, what does that mean for a watch or a watch brand when I'm reviewing it? I suppose the first part is I'm going to be looking at watches. An authentic watch is a watch which is true to itself, that doesn't try and pretend to be a different kind of watch. It doesn't pretend to try and be a different watch. Easier said by examples. So an Invicta Pro Diver, which is clearly a straight out copy of a Rolex Submariner, which is clearly the draftsman that drew the production drawings. I can't even bring myself to call them designers. The draftsman who drew that is clearly, he would be rapt to hear someone mistook his watch for a Rolex. That's being inauthentic. So people who make replicas, people who make rip-offs, people who are just lazy in their design, people who don't bother with a design at all but just pick some generic ideas and throw it on a page, I'm going to argue that that is an inauthentic watch. That's an inauthentic piece of art or engineering to give to us. So there's an example of how being true to yourself, recognizing your own freedoms, your own ability to come up with your own designs, and then refusing not to, but instead just punching out any old crap that anyone could want, is inauthentic. Note doesn't necessarily make it a bad watch. It might be a beautifully made replica of someone else's, and you might be absolutely fine with that. If that's the case, when you get to that part of my review, just stop listening and move on. So to that extent, I'll be looking at, did the designers authentically produce a design of its own, or has it seek to just pretend to be something else? The second part of authenticity, I'm going to say, is it true to its... So the first part is it true to itself? Now the second part is it true to its history and its trajectory? Again, what does that mean? So what I'll be looking at is, if you look at a particular watch, ask yourself, is this watch true to the history or the claims that the company is making about that watch? And I'll give you another example. So when from one of my favorite brands, so I'm not picking on someone else. So one of my favorite brands is Breitling. They brought out the Navitimer 8 recently, and that was quite controversial because it was quasi based on an old World War II flying watch. Big, massive, great 80mm thing that was actually not even really a watch. I think the original was actually just a stopwatch used for like timing bombing runs and things. But then they took this, shrunk it down, made it a bit more normal looking, but then slapped it with a Navitimer name in a watch which was utterly unlike the Navitimer that we've all come to know and love. As I said, this was hugely controversial, and if you go back through some of the old Theo and Harris videos, Christian absolutely unloaded on it, and he wasn't alone in that this watch was just spitting on the history of the brand Breitling. It was just turning its back on everything. And I think that what Christian was grabbing onto here, what he was feeling so affronted by, was this notion of it was fundamentally inauthentic, that this was a watch that is grabbing parts of history and inappropriately using that to try and achieve something it felt it could or should, but wasn't true. Saw something else kind of similar about this recently with the new sort of pilot-focused Tag Octavias, where there was a lot of unrest about the idea that in the past Octavias have been very kind of motorsport driven, and yet here was a new, not chronograph, simple three-hander pilot's watch. Now the interesting thing is that whereas the Breitling one didn't calm down, and in fact, as a result, I believe Breitling have now actually changed the name of the Navitimer 8 series. So they're now calling it the Aviator 8 series. Tag went the other way, and Tag after the fact, put a lot of effort into explaining to people that Octavia has always meant to be automotive and aviation, hence the name Octavia. And that disquiet, that sense of inauthenticity does seem to kind of have dropped away. So maybe Tag was successful in convincing people that they're not being inauthentic, that the new Autavia does stay true to the line. They're not ignoring their history. Again, sticking with this kind of concept, the idea of a two-tone Rolex, the two-tone Rolex Deep Sea. I think, was it the Deep Sea or the Sea Dweller? No idea. The Sea Dweller. I don't know. One of the latest Baselworld releases, who can tell? They came up with a watch which has always been incredibly tool focused. Suddenly it's in two-tone. Again, the Universal got very upset about Rolex finally, marking the gap from being a tool watch to a luxury watch brand. And again, in this case, Tim Mosso going on and spending an enormous amount of energy explaining to people that Rolex have always produced these two-tone models, that gold Submariners go back to the 60s. Again, I think unconsciously what he's doing here is trying to quell the anger by saying Rolex is not acting inauthentically. They're not cheating you. They're not denying their history. They're not lying to you. They are being authentic, and this watch fits within their narrative. There is a third aspect of authenticity which I'm also going to consider in my reviews, and that is transparency. And by transparency, what I mean is the watch telling you what it is, or is it somehow hiding it? For example, is the watch, are they simply using an ETA or a Solita movement, but then slapping their own internal password on, their own internal code on it, and not making it clear, in fact kind of actively hiding in all their documentation that this is a base Solita SW200? If they're doing that, then they're not being particularly transparent. Likewise, are they claiming that this is a manufacture movement when in fact it's been developed by someone else and they've come in and done a little bit of playing with it? Is it that they are claiming that the product has come from a certain place when in fact it has not really? Classic would be Shinola, with their claim that they're an American-made company or an American-made watch, but then were proven not to be. Are they being transparent about where they've come from? I suppose my personal one, and one of the issues that made me think about this concept of transparency would be Spinnaker and Aviate. Are these companies transparent about who they are and what they're bringing? Or are they kind of being a wolf in sheep's clothing? Are they kind of actively hiding the fact that they're large Asian manufacturers, but kind of hiding that behind this idea that there's some little, working out of a garage micro brand that's trying to forge their own path? I think that lack of transparency over who you are or where your parts are coming from, maybe not necessarily lying about where they're coming from, but hiding that sort of thing, I think is a lack of transparency. And in my case, in my mind, it's a lack of authenticity. So just to sum this up, I think a really important concept in reviewing watches is the concept of authenticity. Is a watch true to itself, or is it trying to be something or someone else? Is a watch true to its history and the facts around it, or is it trying to pretend it's not linked to its history? Is it trying to pretend that it can do things that it can't and never will be able to? And finally, is the watchmaker transparent about the watch, where it's come from, who made it, who made the parts, that sort of thing? I think this concept of authenticity and sort of having that as a metric for watches to meet is actually quite helpful, and it catches on a lot of the things which you see reviewers talking about, and it gives a word to it. So anyway, that's me. That's what I'm doing at the moment. That's why if you see my videos and you see this, if you see my watch reviews and you see me talking about the authenticity of a watch, that's what I'm talking about. I'd be interested in your views. Do you think of watches in that way? Do you care whether a watch is authentic, or does that not really bother you? Don't care where it's come from. You just want the spec sheet to be cool and want it to look good. Over to you. You give me some advice now. Tell me in the comments. I've been Pete McConville. This is Not So Obvious Watches. please subscribe. Oh, I keep forgetting. Please subscribe. And if you're still here, I don't want to be one of those channels which goes like Facebook and just like sources questions. But having said that, if there's anything in particular you're interested in and you'd like me to sort of talk about, let me know in the comments. Ask me a question, and then I'll see if I'm interested in it. I'll make a video about it. Thanks. Bye.